What happened between midnight and dawn over Israel last night is not a continuation of the war that started on February 28th. It is a different war, a larger war. A war whose opening hours produced a scale of missile fire that has not been seen directed at any single country since the Second World War. A war whose immediate aftermath has placed three nuclear-armed powers in direct or indirect confrontation for the first time in modern history. And a war whose next move, the response that is being planned right now in Washington and Jerusalem, carries a realistic probability of triggering a chain of escalation that the word unprecedented does not come close to describing. Iran did not fire a barrage last night. Iran fired a bombardment. The distinction matters in ways that every piece of coverage you have seen this morning has failed to explain clearly. A barrage is a sustained volley of fire toward a target. A bombardment is an overwhelming, coordinated, multi-axis saturation attack designed not just to penetrate a defense, but to collapse it. What happened over Israel last night was an attempt to collapse the most advanced missile defense architecture ever built, and the fact that it did not fully succeed does not mean it failed in the ways that matter most for what comes next. Something shifted last night that cannot be unshifted. A threshold was crossed that cannot be uncrossed, and the governments responsible for deciding what comes next are looking at a decision landscape that has no clean options, no safe exits, and no historical precedent close enough to borrow confidence from. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly what Iran fired last night and why the scale and coordination of the attack represents a categorical escalation from everything that came before it. What it means that three nuclear-armed powers are now directly implicated in this conflict's next phase. Why the response being planned in Washington is the decision that could determine whether this war stays regional or becomes something the world has no framework to manage. What the 12 hours between now and the next major military action will look like, and why they are the most consequential 12 hours of this entire conflict, and why the phrase, "this changes everything," is not hyperbole this morning. It is the most accurate description available. Let us start with what happened, because the scale needs to be understood before the implications can be. Iran launched its largest single-night missile and drone attack of the entire conflict between midnight and 4 in the morning Israel time. The numbers that have emerged from Israeli military and American intelligence sources in the hours since the bombardment are numbers that reframe everything that preceded them. Over 120 ballistic missiles fired and coordinated salvos across multiple launch axes. More than 80 cruise missiles deployed simultaneously across different altitude bands to saturate Israeli radar and intercept capacity across all layers of the defensive architecture at once. Dozens of Shahad variant attack drones used as the leading edge of the attack to overwhelm Iron Dome interceptor inventory before the heavier ballistic threats arrived. This was not Iran exhausting its remaining missile stockpile in a desperate final gesture. This was Iran demonstrating that after 28 days of American and Israeli strikes on Iranian launch infrastructure, it retained the organizational and logistical capacity to plan, coordinate, and execute the largest coordinated missile attack in the history of the conflict in a single overnight window. The implications of that demonstration alone, independent of where the missiles landed, independent of the casualties and damage, are seismic for every calculation being made in every capital city that has a stake in this conflict's outcome. Because the working assumption that has governed American and Israeli military planning since day one was that sustained strikes on Iranian launch infrastructure would progressively degrade Iran's ability to execute exactly this kind of coordinated, large-scale attack.
Last night proved that assumption wrong, or at minimum proved it dramatically less reliable than the planners who built the campaign around it believed. The structure of last night's attack reveals something about Iranian military planning that goes beyond this single engagement. A coordinated, multi-axis attack using 3 distinct weapon systems in a carefully sequenced timing pattern does not happen spontaneously. It does not happen because a commander decided to fire everything available in a moment of desperation. It happens because it was planned, rehearsed in simulation, coordinated across multiple command nodes that had to survive 28 days of American and Israeli strikes on Iranian military communications infrastructure. The fact that Iran could execute this level of coordination after nearly a month of sustained suppression is itself a revelation about the resilience and redundancy built into its military command architecture. The drones went first, slow, attritable, cheap enough to be expended in volume without strategic loss. Their mission was not to penetrate Israeli airspace and destroy high-value targets. Their mission was to force Israeli Iron Dome batteries to engage, expending interceptors at $50,000 each against threats that cost a fraction of that figure to manufacture and deploy at scale. Exhaust the low-altitude layer first. Drain the interceptor inventory at the cheapest cost per depletion ratio possible. Then the cruise missiles came in at low altitude from multiple directions, forcing David's sling into sustained engagement mode, while the Iron Dome batteries were still recovering from the drone wave, and their operators were managing the reload and repositioning tempo that sustained engagement requires. And then into a defensive system that had been running at maximum output for nearly an hour against 2 simultaneous threat streams, the ballistic missile salvos arrived. Over 120 ballistic missiles entering Israeli airspace across multiple approach vectors, forcing Arrow batteries to engage simultaneously from directions that the battery positioning was not optimized to handle all at once. This was not a missile attack in the conventional sense of the phrase. This was a systems engineering problem applied to air defense defeat, a deliberate, sequenced exploitation of the throughput limits and reload cycles and simultaneous engagement ceilings that every air defense architecture, no matter how advanced, possesses. And whoever planned it understood Israeli defensive architecture at a level of operational detail that should alarm every person watching this story. The casualties and damage from last night's bombardment have not been fully assessed as of this recording, and the numbers being reported from multiple sources are still being verified and in some cases contradicted by subsequent updates. What is known is that the scale of penetration was significantly higher than any previous Iranian strike in this conflict. Multiple impacts were confirmed in the Tel Aviv metropolitan area, damage to a facility in Haifa with industrial significance to Israel's northern economy, a confirmed impact near Ben Gurion Airport that has forced the temporary suspension of commercial flight operations, and whose symbolism, an attack on Israel's primary international gateway, carries a message that extends beyond the physical damage. The total number of Israeli fatalities from last night's bombardment is a number that Israeli authorities have not yet released in full, which itself tells you something. When the numbers are manageable and the interception narrative holds, official communications move quickly. Delayed full casualty reporting suggests a number that requires careful management before release, and the wounded count, already confirmed to be in the dozens from the strikes that have been specifically attributed, points toward a total human cost that is the highest single-night toll of this conflict so far. Last night was not a successful defense with minor penetrations. It was the first night of this war where the phrase, "the system held," cannot be stated without immediate and substantial qualification. Now, let us talk about the 3 nuclear-armed powers, because this is the development that most of this morning's coverage is treating as context rather than as the central fact it actually is. America is directly engaged in military operations against Iran. That is not a proxy relationship or a support role. American B-2 bombers have struck Iranian territory. American naval assets have fired cruise missiles at Iranian targets. American electronic warfare support has been integral to Israeli strike operations throughout the conflict. America is a belligerent in this war in every meaningful military sense of that word. Russia is supplying Iran with drone technology, enhanced Giron-2 variants that improve on the original technology Tehran supplied to Moscow after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The resupply is active and documented. Russia is not a passive observer of a conflict that happens to involve Iranian weapons. It is an active military supplier to one of the parties currently in direct combat